So I went to Tentsmuir Forest for the first time about 3 weeks ago. As someone who is not Scottish and is not familiar with the area, it was nice to be able to explore something that was so close to the city and university life. I didn't expect it to be so big for a start, or at least have so many paths. I expected it to be a lot wilder than it really was. I went with my boyfriend for the day, and we walked about 10 miles from the edge of the forest right up to an expansive beach, which breaks out into a really nice view. And you're almost looking back on Dundee. It's a nice spot for reflection. And we'd brought with us some food, and I was wearing a pink velvet dress, which felt very fancy for a walk, but at the same time, just kind of fun and free. And it was sunny but still cold. There was quite a lot of people on bikes, in particular a kind of gang of boys that had stopped by a small pond, and they'd been playing with frogs for I don't know how long, because we crossed them twice, and they were holding them, and which made me a little bit upset because I didn't want them to hurt them, but it just seemed more playful more than anything. The other thing that struck me about Tentsmuir is the amount of abandoned shelters there was that we came across. Seem a little bit mysterious. Other than that, it felt quite quite a dark place, because we'd walked a lot further than we had expected to. By the time we were coming back, we were racing against the night coming down. And because you're undercover in the trees, it gets a lot darker a lot quicker. And so we were almost joking about psyching each other up to spend a night in Tentsmuir Forest, which would be a little bit too freaky for my comfort. In the same way, we definitely weren't the only ones there at night. We came across a couple of tents and even some campfires, because all the kind of normal day walkers had disappeared by that point, so you were left with teenagers having a drink on the beach or camping up in the forest. I would say that I would like to go back, just because I feel like there's a lot of it left that I haven't seen, even though this is a very recent impression.
I do remember coming across Tentsmuir and being really blown away by what we have on our doorstep, but the fact that it's beach and woodland combined makes it an extra special place. And it really struck me. You've got this combination of beautiful beaches, forest, even though they are kind of heavily kind of farmed. I still don't think that detracts from the kind of beauty of woodland space. Others would disagree with me. And yeah, it's that combination. You also have the sand dunes, and it was just one of these places that I felt really drawn to, and a space where you could go to a sort of quite a meditative space, but also a space that I guess a lot of students have been drawn to make work as well. So my first time I really spent time on the beach was I took 14 performers out, and they spent a day in Tentsmuir Forest, all tied together by their hair. which was quite an amazing experience, and just exploring the forest, exploring the sand dunes, and we made a film out of it. I was working with a choreographer, and we were working with mark making. So obviously sand is the perfect place to kind of really explore how the body, like the marks that your body makes when you're dancing. But I often, if I've got people coming to visit, that'll be a favourite place to take people, just because, again, that sort of combination of beach, forest, I guess the light. I have 2 kids, so I've been taking them there from as young as, from since they were babies. And what I've often found really funny is I could never ever take them there without them going in the water, whatever time of year. I mean, it could be January and they'd be in the water. But what I love about the forest is that, you know, because they've got the trees with this of pine, what do you call them? Not pine cones, but the, you know, the little green, strange, like when you're walking over the surface of the forest floor, there's this really kind of strange, it's kind of a dull echo. It's this kind of extreme sort of peacefulness when you're in the forest. So if there's not a lot of other people around, there's this kind of bizarre silence. And, yeah, and then you start to tune in, obviously, to the nature around you. And also with these, the huge concrete boulder over from like war, you know, you see that there's that whole history there that, you know, often people walk by and they'll think, oh, what are these things? And they may not come across information that sort of explains what it is, but yeah, so you're immediately sort of thrown back into the past and trying to imagine at one point what, you know, all the kind of what could have been happening on that water and on those beaches. So it's a very sort of mixed place in many ways, just with the changes in environment, its history, and a place, yeah, to go if you just want to have a really sort of meditative walk. The sound of Tentsmuir, I mean, that's, yeah, so my first thought is, like, you know, that sort of contrast between being on the beach and the wind, when it can get really windy, and then you walk into the forest and the wind just disappears, and then you've got that really sort of strange kind of dulled sound, with the kind of deep floor underneath your feet. And yeah, it's a great place to just go and sort of put things into perspective again. You know, if I want to walk with somebody and have proper conversation, it's a great place to go, and everybody that I've taken there that's never been there before are really blown away. Quite often end up in the water.
The first time that I went was whenever, so I was staying with my aunt and uncle in Roy Ferry, and it was 3 years ago. So I was in first year, and it was the kind of like year anniversary of my dad having died. So it was the first time that I went to Tentsmuir. It was like on that weekend. So I didn't actually, my first like experience of Tentsmuir was like so kind of like clouded. I like didn't quite have like a positive experience of it in the first place, but then like now whenever I go, it is very much like, because it is just so beautiful, and I don't think those kind of things like taint places for me. I only remember the parts of that like morning that I have photos of. So there's a photo of like my family and I, like my aunt and uncle, my sister and cousins and me, on the beach, and so that was like I remember that moment, and like because it is kind of like this really, I don't know, it's really like rogue terrain wise, you know, like the forest, and then there's like the beach, and then like you've got this like part where the forest like literally like is getting eaten away by the beach, so you've got all these like exposed roots, and then you've got all these like dunes and these like sandbars, and like you like kind of walk along a wee bit more and there's like a really really flat like sand, and like it's really kind of like pristine, and then you've got like a lot of kind of like this weird like murky like sandy grassy watery boggy, I don't know, it's just like there's a lot of different landscape in it, and I feel like it kind of does reflect like a lot of like different like points of life. Like it's not like you just go to, it's not just a beach or just forest, like it's so much more kind of like complex than that, and I feel like that kind of, I don't know, I quite like that because it feels like it's not perfect. There's like something for like whatever I'm feeling. Being near the water for me is like always quite like therapeutic. I think I kind of see home as being very kind of like transitory. I think especially because like with losing my dad, then it kind of takes away the permanence of place. In the direction of the dunes, kind of like if you're going from Tentsmuir, got all these dunes and it's like all very grassy, and it's kind of this like weird kind of sandy, licheny, mossy kind of landscape. A lot of like heather or gorse or something like that. It almost is kind of like vaguely mountainous, but then it's got like more specific tracks. It feels a lot more like organized, whereas like there's this like place in between where like you're just kind of like obeying what has been put out for you. You can kind of go off kilter a wee bit. You've then got rocks in the way, you've got these massive boulders, and then you've got like patches of sand where it's deep water all of a sudden. Fitting yourself into that landscape, following its lines that it's already got. Because I have just gone through the forest before, but it was a really beautiful part of the forest that I'd never kind of seen before. Like it felt like this very like soft part. I don't know, it's just very big, and you feel very small in it. Like I have this kind of collection of like these distinct images of the time before, because you purposefully go there. You like don't really like stumble upon it.
The wind launches an endless assault on the old World War II fortifications at Tentsmuir Forest. Bleached sands digest the pillboxes, which are deprived of any foundation. They appear to be unmoored. The landscape is caught in a permanent drift. It's a zone where the logic of the ocean is applied to the landmass. The interior silence of the pillboxes was a clearer threshold than the actual doorway. The absence of sound signaled a complete departure from the world outside.
Because I remember going when I was like, I don't know how old it would have been, like maybe like 10ish. I feel like I must have been before, but I remember like that one time. That's like the first like memory I have of it, I guess. So we went like, it was like our family and this other family, went on a nice wee trip to the beach. But then I remember it because my oldest brother, he was like 16, or I don't know, he was like a teenager. He like would often have like strops and stuff, and then we had a nice day at the beach. And then when we went home, he was like, oh, I left my shoes at the beach. And he had like this massive meltdown. He was like, my lovely shoes, like, oh, what am I gonna do? And like, I don't know, someone in like the other family went back, even though it was like the middle of the night, and like searched the beach for these shoes, and they were like buried under the sand or something. And then I also went there quite a lot in 5th year of school, because instead of doing PE, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this volunteering thing instead. So like a group of people from my year, we'd like go and do like beach cleanups and stuff. And then it was like this other part of Tentsmuir, not like the beach bit, there's like a loch or something. And it's like a dragonfly site apparently, like a top dragonfly site. And we just, for like hours, we'd have to move logs about to make it a nice home for the dragonflies. I don't know like how that helped, but they had like a massive bonfire, and we were like carrying big logs into the bonfire for like hours. Yeah, I think there's also like a bird hide at one point, because we were like bird watching, and then one of my pals was like, oh my goodness, look at that massive bird, what is that? it was just this like wood pigeon. And she was like, wow, I've never seen one of those before. So.
Well, my family comes from the serious Pitscotty Daresey area of Fife on my mother's side. It was a farming family. And in their youth, my mother and twin sister, my Auntie Mamie, would cycle all over the area. This was in the interwar years. So although Kinshoddy and Tentsmuir were a fair distance away, these places were still well within cycling range for such intrepid girls. The West Sands there provided reasonable access to the Tentsmuir Sands after a little judicious wading across the Eden estuary. The beach was never crowded then as the West Sands at St Andrews could be. Anyway, in her later years, when we lived close to her, we would pile into the car at the first sign that the sea might be warm enough for a swim, generally the middle of July. What I remember was that it was a pretty long and winding drive down to the beach at Kinshoddy, generally with a lot of argument about whether we were actually on the right road or had taken a wrong turn in Lookers. Not many people would actually go that way back in the time, and I mainly remember it anyway. I'm afraid I was never very fond of the place. I've a certain repugnance for the industrial kind of forest, or plantation more accurately. And because the ground was so flat and unhilly there had never been any reason for the Forestry Commission to make the tracks anything but dead straight and set out in a grid, which made for really boring walking, and the weird sense of dislocation you get when you walk for a long time with exactly the same view ahead of you. The kids liked it. If they got lost in the trees, all they had to do was jump out onto a path and shout, and you could generally see them, even if it dwindled into the distance. I was always sure that the dogs got a bit disorientated though. My auntie liked the sand dunes, which she said were always glorious when the sea buckthorn was in bloom. This I don't remember. Possibly I would be there at the wrong time if I normally went for the swimming season. But there was another reason why she would take us there, into the forest, that is, and this was some kind of orchid which she said was very rare and which grew somewhere among the trees. I can't remember what kind. I thought it was a lady's slipper orchid, but from what I've heard, the lady's slipper is quite a showy plant, and this little fellow was anything but showy. How my aunt would locate it I could never quite fathom, since all parts of the forest looked pretty alike to me. But she would start off with a vague, it's somewhere about here, a couple of 100 yards from the car park as I recall, and then would go sniffing off among the trees like a true tracker, and generally find a quarry, and we would look at it, and she would remark that she was glad it was still here, and that would be that assignment done for another year. It's a queer thing, but you do often find that these industrial forests can harbour a few unusual or rare species of plant or insect or animal. I'm sure there was some kind of rare fritillary butterfly there too at one time. So maybe there's a point to creating a forest that's not too attractive to walk in. Nature's more likely to get left in peace for a few decades. My son Robin knew the place better than I did, as he hung out with some fairly disreputable friends in Tayport, and they'd saunter along to Tentsmuir from that end to engage in their clandestine activities. He said he'd walk the entire length of the forest from Tayport to St Andrews on some occasions, though how we got over the Eden estuary in one piece I'm not so sure. God favours drunks, I suppose. Funnily enough, my main memory is of something I do like to see, and you didn't have to walk very far to see it, and that is the trunks of Scots pine trees rising up out of, basically bare sand. I don't know why I find that so magical. Something to do with the subtle muted colours. Well, they're not always that muted with Scots pines. And also the slightly improbable sense that you're both deep in a forest and also very close to the sea.